Chapter 14. There were 22 Rayas of Bisnaga before the final destruction of the city, and Krishna Raya was the 18th and most glorious of them all. Not so long after he became king he began to add Deva, God, to his name to indicate his high opinion of himself. And he became Krishnadev Raya, Krishna God King, but at the start of his reign he was just Krishna, named after the beloved blue-skinned deity, yes, but neither blue nor godly, although beloved fitted him well. During his life and after his death his court poets celebrated him in 3 languages, and their portraits were uniformly laudatory, and there were many statues made of him and these flattered him too. He became more handsome in stone, his body grew slimmer and more muscular. And if the sculptor had put a flute in his hand and some adoring milkmaids at his feet he could easily have been mistaken for the god after whom he was named. In reality he was, to be frank, a little chubby. And his face showed the marks of a childhood attack of smallpox, which he had happily survived. However, he boasted a luxuriant handlebar mustache, a strong jawline, and it was said, though this may have been simply more of the flattery of his courtiers, that his sexual prowess was second to none. For an account of his ascension to what was now being called the Lion Throne, or sometimes also the Diamond Throne, for an actual throne had by this time replaced the original royal goddess, or mattresses, there presently exist not 1 but 2 rediscovered manuscripts. As always in this retelling we rely primarily on Pampa Campana's work, but the journal of an Italian traveler, Niccolò de Vieri, who visited Bisnaga in Krishnadev Raya's time, has also come to light. That Vieri who nicknamed himself Signor Rimbalzo, Mr. Bounce, because for much of his life he bounced from place to place. Between them they provide 7 different narratives of how Krishnadev Raya became king. Vieri's tales are more bloodthirsty than Pampa Campana's, which may tell us more about the yarn spinners than about the historical event. Vieri tells us that there was bad blood between Krishna and his much older half-brother, Narasimha. They were both sons of the first king of the Tuluva dynasty, Tuluva himself, a low-caste army commander who had seized the throne, but their mothers, both ambitious former courtesans. Tipamba was the mother of the older son, and Nagamamba of the younger, hated each other and brought up their sons to do the same. When Tuluva was dying, Narasimha ordered the king's chief minister to blind his younger brother Krishna and bring him the eyes as proof, writes Niccolò de Vieri. However, this minister, Saluva Timoresu, about whom much more will be said, killed a goat and brought the goat's eyes to Narasimha instead, and then made sure it was Krishna who succeeded the king when he died. Pampa Campana, however, tells us that there was no bad blood between the half-brothers. And in fact, Narasimha willingly gave up his right to the throne and handed Krishna the signet ring of kingship. But no, cries Vieri, what happened is that Narasimha's mother, the vicious Tipamba, plotted to murder Krishna, and Timoresu had to hide him to keep him safe. Nonsense? Responds Pampa Campana, the truth is that the brilliant Prince Krishna was playing his flute on the riverbank and all came to listen and wonder, saying, truly, the god walks among us, and that settled it. To which Vieri answers with the story of how on his deathbed Tuluva, the father of both Narasimha and Krishna, told the 2 sons that whoever could pull the signet ring off his finger would be king. Narasimha tried, but the finger was too swollen, because the old man was too full of death. Then Krishna simply cut off his father's finger and grabbed the ring for himself. It is plain that Pampa Campana in her telling has little time for the gruesome and violent legends in which the foreigner Vieri seems to rejoice. She suggests that, in reality, old King Tuluva placed a dagger in the center of a large carpet and challenged his sons to seize it without walking on that rug. Narasimha was at a loss, but Krishna just rolled up the carpet until the dagger was within his grasp, and so won the day. Vieri retorts with a rumor of a fight to the death between the 2 half-brothers, at the end of which Krishna stood over the other's corpse and held aloft his bloodied sword and so won the crown. All these tales can be treated with respect or dismissed as tall tales, as the reader prefers. For our purposes the most important version, although perhaps the hardest to believe, is the 8th one, in which Pampa Campana is present herself, along with Zerelda Lee. On the day of their father's death, Pampa Campana tells us, Krishna and his half-brother walked together to the palace gates to announce the passing of Tuluva Raya to the gathered crowd. As they came forward, Krishna looked up into the sky and saw two teal kites circling overhead. High up in the heat-shimmered air. Once, twice, thrice they circled, until he believed their presence might be an augury. If they circle around us 7 times, he said, then it's certain they come with a message from the gods. And indeed the 2 kites did make 7 circles. Coming down gradually, lower and lower on each circle, until they were flying right over the 2 princes' heads. Then they dropped to the ground at the 2 men's feet, and to everyone's amazement they metamorphosed into 2 of the most beautiful women anyone had ever seen, sisters from heaven. Or so it seemed. In a swift movement they knelt at the feet of Prince Krishna, bowed their heads, and offered him their magnificent swords. We place ourselves at your service, and at the service of the empire of Bisnaga, they said. After that there wasn't any argument about the succession to the lion throne. The half-brother Narasimha disappears from Pampa Campana's manuscript and is never heard of again. We must hope that Krishna Raya allowed him to live in comfortable anonymity for the rest of his days. The spectacular arrival in Bisnaga of Pampa Campana and Zerelda was a gamble that paid off. There were risks in such a bravura entry. There was the danger that such beings as they were revealing themselves to be would engender fear and hostility rather than acceptance. But Pampa Campana had been determined to enter Bisnaga through the front door this time, instead of crawling through a tunnel. This time, she wanted to be seen for who and what she was. Fortunately, their timing was excellent. The newly crowned Krishna Tuluva, now Krishna Raya, was convinced that Pampa Campana and Zerelda were supernatural beings, apsaras, celestial nymphs who were known to be shapeshifters, sent down from above to bless his reign, and after that their safety was assured. They were given lavish accommodations in the palace, and expressed their gratitude for it, although Pampa Campana, who remembered the days of living in the queen's quarters, was obliged to smother a surge of disappointment. It was plain that the young king was intoxicated by the 2 women who had descended from the skies, thought to be sisters by one and all, and was already thinking about romance, although his preference was unclear, even to himself. But in the beginning he was engulfed by matters of state and understood that love and marriage would have to wait. By this time, the grand old Sultanate of Zafarabad had broken up into 5 smaller kingdoms, Ahmadnagar, Berar, Bidar, Bijapur, and Golconda. And nobody spoke about a ghost sultanate anymore. This is how history moves. The obsession of one moment is relegated to the junkyard of oblivion by the next. All 5 of the new sultans, undeterred by their smaller territories, were hungry for expansion, especially the Sultan of Golconda. Rich in diamonds, who was happy to be freed from the domination of the old Zafarabad regime, and had plans of his own to establish a new dominance over the region. In addition, the Gajapati dynasty's kingdom to the east had grown more powerful. And they too had designs on the lands of the Bisnaga Empire. The arrival of a new, young, untested king on the lion throne encouraged them to try their luck. When Krishna Raya's army was ready to march against the oncoming, combined forces of Bidar and Bijapur, Pampa Campana and Zerelda asked for an audience with the king. Do not number us among the brocaded ladies of the royal court, accustomed to lounging among silken fabrics and eunuchs, singing love songs all day, smoking opium and drinking sweet pomegranate juice, Pampa Campana told him. You will find no better warriors in your service than ourselves. Krishna Raya was impressed. The old Kwun constructed in the time of Grandmaster Li still stands, he said. We will bring the finest women warriors of our palace guard there, and let's see how well you do against them. We have been trained by the very best, Zerelda said. So we would prefer to be tested against men as well as women. Don't underestimate the fighting women here, said the sizable woman who was the head of the palace guard. My forebear was the invincible Ulupi. And I have taken her name in her honor. You will find me the equal of any man. The king was amused. Enough, enough, he said, laughing. Ulupi Jr. will fight you both, my 2 apsaras, and we will find a mere man to put you to the test as well. He summoned Thema the Huge, so called both because it was a fair description and also to avoid confusion with Saluva Timoresu, Krishna Raya's prime minister. It was said of this immense, silent hulk that he was more elephant than man. His arms like two long trunks that could swing an enemy into the air and hurl him great distances, his gigantic feet able to crush opponents beneath their unimaginable weight. He needed so much to eat that, like a working elephant, he had to carry his food in a sack around his neck. And if he was not fighting or sleeping, then he was eating. On the battlefield, his mere arrival was enough to make entire platoons of adversaries turn and flee. His weapon of choice was the club, but on entering the Kun, he picked up a spear as well. The balconies of the Kun were full. Nobody gave the two women much of a chance, even if they had arrived from the skies, and the watchers began to bet against them. Thema and Ulupi Jr. were heavy favorites. Only the king, as an act of friendship to the new arrivals who had blessed his claim to the throne, placed a large bet on the supernatural ladies, on whom he received very long odds. Then the combat started, and all those who had backed the two local heroes quickly understood that their money was lost. The spectacle of the two apsaras whirling up into the air to attack their opponents from above, running up walls and along the rooftops of the Kun to dive down, attack, and retreat again, was dizzying not only to the spectators but to their opponents, who were soon reduced to standing back to back in the center of the Kun's fighting arena, swinging and lunging at empty air. The aerial ballet of the two women, punctuated with bouts of swordplay that were almost ecstatic in their beauty, left Thema the Huge and Ulupi Jr. exhausted, with only a smashed club, a bisected javelin, and a broken sword to fight with. When Thema finally sank to his knees panting, the king threw a scarlet cloth into the arena to indicate that the battle was at an end. After that day there was no argument about the most fearsome fighters in Bisnaga, and Krishna Raya declared, "All four of these warriors will come with me to the wars, and no force on earth will be able to withstand us." The oldest spectators, who were familiar with the old stories, said to one another, the only women who could ever fight like that were Pampa Campana and her 3 daughters, especially Zerelda Sangama. That memory ran swiftly around the galleries of the Kun and dropped down into the arena and reached the ears of the combatants and the king. "Then call me Pampa Campana," said Pampa Campana, "and I will be her second coming. Or, to be precise, her third. And call me Zerelda," said Zerelda Lee, "and I will be that great lady reborn." The gold coins Krishna Raya had won by betting on the two women were used to buy food to distribute to the poor. In this way both the king and the victorious ladies began to be seen as virtuous benefactors of the people, and were much loved. "It's a new age in Bisnaga," people began to say. And so it proved to be. When the army paused at night, on the road north to Dawani to face the armies of Bijapur and Bidar, Pampa Campana and Zerelda Lee shared a tent, and this, after the non-stop activity that had followed their first meeting, was where they finally had time to begin to know each other. "Tell me your story," Pampa Campana said, and the young woman, who by nature was a reticent and inward person, made so by the strangeness of her life, opened up to this apparition of a youthful ancestor who was the very incarnation and point of origin of that strangeness. "I was born on a ship," she said, "and nobody can put down roots in the sea. This is how it has been for us ever since Zerelda Sangama and Grandmaster Li joined General Chingho. We have been women on ships, making our way here, there, everywhere, finding men, not marrying them, following the lead of Zerelda Sangama and Grandmaster Li, who never married, but remained true to one another all their lives, and having daughters, and carrying on, bearing Zerelda Sangama's given name, Zerelda after Zerelda after Zerelda, ending with me, the 6th of that line, and we kept the Grandmaster's family name as well, down all our generations. So we have all been Zerelda Lee, the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd, and so on. As for me, I had my mother and that was all. My father was mislaid in a port somewhere. There were no other children on board, so from the beginning I was treated as an adult and expected to behave as such. I grew up silent and watchful, and I think the men on board, tattooed, gold-toothed, peg-legged, eye-patched, piratical types of whom a normal girl would be terrified, were actually a little scared of me, and very scared of my mother, and so they kept their distance. The ship itself was my only neighborhood, it was the street where I lived, but there was a new world waiting every time we came into port, and that new world became a part of my world too, for a while. Java, Brunei, Siam, the far lands of Asia, and in the opposite direction the lands of Araby. The Horn of Africa, the Swahili coast. When we brought the giraffe of Malindi back to China, the emperor said it was proof of the mandate of heaven that blessed and authorized his rule. We brought ostriches too, but they were not held to be divine, being too foolish looking. This was my life. Everywhere and nowhere, and I discovered I possessed the gift of holding the shape of things in my mind. I became a map of the world. I learned that the world is infinite in its beauty, but also unrelenting, unforgiving, greedy, careless, and cruel. I learned that love is for the most part absent and, when it appears, is usually fitful, fleeting, and finally unsatisfactory. I learned that the communities men build are based on the oppression of the many by the few, and I did not understand, I still do not understand, why the many accept this oppression. Maybe it is because when they do not accept it and rise up, what follows is a greater oppression than the one they overthrew. I began to think that I did not like human beings very much, but I loved mountains, music, forests, dancing, wide rivers, singing. And of course the sea. The sea was my home. And finally I learned that the world takes your home away without any remorse. Somewhere on the eastern coast of Africa a yellow fever came aboard. I was spared, but many died, including my mother. All I had left was what she had taught me. The high arts of battle, and her dying words, the dying words of all the Zereldas. Find Pampa Campana. And so here I am, and now you know everything. Your map of the world, Pampa Campana said, do you have an actual map in your head? Can you see how the world joins up? How here connects with there, and is affected by it and changed by it? Can you see the shape of things? Yes, said Zerelda Lee, I see it very clearly. Then I will tell you who I am, Pampa Campana said. I am a map of time. I carry almost 2 centuries within me and will absorb half a century more before I'm done. And just as you can see how here connects to there, so I perceive how then is joined to now. Then let's both make our maps, Zerelda Lee proposed, clapping her hands. I'll set mine down on paper if you will agree to do the same with yours. I will ask the king for a map room and cover every inch of the walls and even the ceiling with pictures of the great world beyond the sea. And you must ask for an empty book that you will fill with history and dreams, and maybe tell the future as well, while you're at it. There, in that Spartan military encampment, on the road to war, Pampa Campana's masterwork was born. She began in earnest to write the Jayapurajaya. Even though to do so meant revisiting the horror of the fire that consumed her mother, and Zerelda Lee began to draw the maps that would be thought, for 55 years, to be the most perfect works of the cartographer's art. But the map room did not survive the destruction of Bisnaga. And no shred of Zerelda Lee's genius remains for us to marvel at today. The Battle of Diwani didn't last long, and would be better described as a rout. As the armies of Bijapur and Bidar fled the field, the vanquished sultans prostrated themselves at Krishna Raya's feet. Expecting to be trampled by the battle elephant, Masti Madahasti, on which he sat in his golden howdah, looking down at them with the wide yellow-toothed grin of victory. But Krishna held his elephant back. He has sensitive feet, he informed the prone sultans. And I don't want to injure them if I can help it. So, I suggest that you can live, and go back to your petty thrones, but from now on both your sultanates will be subservient to the Bisnaga Empire, and you will accept my supremacy, and pay me tribute. I hope you will accept this generous offer, because if not then Masti Madahasti here may have to risk his tender feet after all. There's just one thing, said the horizontal sultan of Bijapur. We are not prepared to convert to your religion with its 1,001 gods. And if you insist on that, then let the elephant do its worst. Is that not so, my friend Bidar? The Sultan of Bidar considered for a moment. Then, yes, he said, I suppose so. Krishna Raya let out a loud laugh, a laugh containing little mirth. Why would I insist on such a thing, he asked. In the first place, such conversions are dishonest. We know from our history that the founders of Bisnaga, Hakka, and Bukka Sangama were forcibly converted by the Delhi Sultan and obliged for a time to pretend to accept your tediously unitary God, but they escaped the first chance they got and gave up all that nonsense at once. In the second place, were you to convert, you would lose the support of your own people and therefore be unable to convince them of the value of loyalty to the Bisnaga Empire, and after that you would be of little use to me. And in the third place, if by some miracle your people followed you and converted en masse, who then would occupy all those beautiful mosques you have built in your sultanates? So, keep your faith, my elephant doesn't mind if you do. But if you show disloyalty to the empire in even the slightest degree, then Masti Madahasti may have to risk his tender feet after all and pound you both to death. In that age of decapitations, straw-stuffed heads, assassinations, and elephant crushings, news of Krishna Raya's merciful act spread rapidly, and was thought to be greatly to his credit. Thus began the legend of the new God King, as godlike as the god after whom he was named, a legend which, very soon, Krishna Raya unfortunately began to believe himself. On that day, however, Pampa Campana noticed a more immediate motive for his act of forgiveness. As Krishna Raya was pardoning the defeated sultans, his eyes moved away from their humbled bodies and darted between Zerelda Lee and Pampa Campana herself. They were mounted on horseback and positioned to his elephant's right. Ulupi Jr. and Thema the Huge were to his left, on foot. But the king's gaze never once strayed in their direction. Zerelda Lee kept looking straight ahead and gave no indication that she was aware of the king's scrutiny, but Pampa Campana looked right back at him until his grin widened, becoming even more yellow, and he actually blushed. Pampa Campana put her hands together and applauded him for his wisdom. He bowed his head to recognize her gesture, because the approval of his two apsaras was something he found that he greatly desired. It was plain that something had begun. It was Mahamantri or Great Minister Saluva Timarasu who had taught the young Krishna Raya about the importance of the number 7. There were, he said, 7 ways to handle an adversary. You could try to reason with him, or bribe him, or stir up trouble in his territories. You could lie to him in peacetime and trick him on the battlefield. You could attack him, obviously, and this was the recommended method, or finally, not to be recommended, you could forgive him. When Krishna Raya forgave the 2 sultans at Diwani, almost everyone approved and praised his humane act. Timarasu, however, greeted him on his return to the palace with the words, I hope that wasn't really forgiveness, because that would be a sign of weakness, but if it's a trick, it's a good one. I attacked and defeated them first, said Krishna Raya, then I offered them the bribe of survival using the appearance of forgiveness, and acting the part of a reasonable man. We will send spies to Bijapur and Bidar to make trouble for them. So they will be preoccupied with local dissensions and therefore unable to try anything against us again, and we will lie to them if they accuse us of having done so. You can call this a trick if you wish. I prefer to think that I am using all 7 techniques at once. Timarasu was impressed. I see that the student has outstripped the teacher, he said. You saved my life more than once, Krishna Raya said, so you will always be at my right hand, and I will go on learning what you have to teach. In that case, welcome home, Timarasu said. And I must immediately inform you about the 7 vices of kings. Krishna Raya sat back on the lion throne. I can already dismiss 2 of them, he said. I don't drink, and I don't gamble. So you don't need to tell me the Mahabharata story of how Yudhishthir rolled the dice and lost his kingdom and his wife. Everybody knows that story. Spare me, too, the allegory of the god of death and the poisoned waters of the lake. You have also shown that you avoid harshness in war, Timarasu said. But the vice of arrogance is already present in you. That is something we need to work on. Not now, said the king, with a dismissive gesture. 3 more to go. The hunt, Timurasu said. I hate the hunt, Krishnaraya said. A barbarian practice. I prefer poetry and music. Wasting money, Timurasu said. Money will be your job, said the king, laughing, although it was not clear if he was making a joke. The purse strings of the treasury are in your hands. And the power of taxation. If you get greedy or waste money, I'll chop off your head. That's fair, said Timurasu. What's the last vice? Krishnaraya asked. Women, his minister replied. If you're going to tell me I can only have 7 wives, Krishnaraya replied, don't. There are some matters regarding which the number 7 is inadequate. Understood, Timurasu said. Though I may have more to say about this at another time. For now, I'll just offer my congratulations. 5 out of 7 isn't bad. You'll make a fine king. Then he came up close to the king and slapped him hard in the face. Before Krishnaraya could begin to express his shock and anger, Timurasu said, that is to remind you that the common people suffer pain every day. And that is more than enough education for one day, said the king, rubbing his face. It's lucky for you that I have only just now said that I'm willing to be schooled by you.